Hello, my name is Bret. This is my live show. I have deja vu every week, exactly at this time, because I do the exact same thing. I welcome you to the show. You're here to ask questions and to learn something new, mostly in DevOps and containers, which is all I've been talking about for 7 years. I was actually reflecting on the Docker birthday that's about to hit next month. We're going to have 10-year Docker birthday next month. It's going to be pretty exciting. We like round numbers as humans. So I was just reflecting on what I was doing with Docker almost 10 years ago and wrote a little quote for Eric Smalling, who may or may not be here today, but Docker Captain Eric is got a newsletter, and he's going to have some quotes from people that were using Docker in its early days and what it was like to be sort of on the edge, on the bleeding tip edge of container stuff. So that's coming up next month. We don't really have a plan, but we should have a plan for Docker and the new V23 release, the new big Docker engine announcement, and then also the Docker birthday. We should probably do something. So stay tuned. I'm excited to have Nuno on the show today. Before we bring him on, I just want to mention a couple of things. So if you haven't heard me talking everywhere about this is my new live course. I will mention it every week up until the launch in a month. We have 4 weeks now for you to still sign up. This is a course meant to get you actually using the products in, at least if not in your dev and testing works, but in production within 2 weeks. This is not one of those video courses where I record hours of video and you watch it eventually and then you do something with it eventually. This is meant to take the skills that you're learning about GitHub Actions and GitOps, which is Argo CD. We're going to be focusing on Argo and GitHub Actions. Those are the two tools. We're going to use them together along with an array of other security, build tools, all sorts of stuff. And we're going to be doing that together in real time in Zoom, basically. Together, there's only going to be 15 people allowed in the course. So we've now had multiple signups. So I expect the seats to be filled before the last day it's on sale. I'm going to throw that link in the chat. Anyway, it's my first time trying this out. I'm excited because we get to hang out together for about 90 minutes every other day for 2 weeks. And we are going to implement these tools on a test cluster and in your own test repos. And then we have scheduled time for you to do this on your own projects while having access to all of us in video. And we're basically going to be heads down together, just working on our own projects, but have the ability to actually ask when you hit a roadblock while you're doing your work. So I've never done that before, and I've done it with clients, consulting, but not with a group. So this is kind of like getting private consulting or small group consulting, but at the price of a course. So check it out there. There's all the details in that site, the dates, the times of day that it's going to happen, what days they're going to be there. Yes, you get recordings and all the resources when this is going to happen. This is a steep discount off. It's hundreds of dollars off what the next cohort will be. This is sort of like the beta cohort. So you get to learn. We'll probably spend some extra time like making sure that it's all good and everybody's getting what they need out of it. And since it is the first group, I'm going to give you a nice little discount for taking a chance on me. But it starts in March, on March 20th. And I can't wait to get started. So enough about that. Did you know I have a newsletter? We have rebooted the newsletter this year. You can check that out over here. And we just launched week 6 of that. So it's a short newsletter, but it's focused on what I'm creating, maybe 1 or 2 important things I've seen elsewhere. It's not an industry newsletter. I think we have plenty of those from great people. DevOps-ish from Chris. If you look up DevOps-ish, that's a great newsletter, and there's others out there. But so it's a short newsletter on what I'm creating, what's going on, conversations I see people having, people that are basically creating these tools, what conversations are they having, and maybe some reminders of old stuff that's happened, like this old blog post from 2 years ago, which I think is still an excellent way to learn the difference between Docker and Kubernetes. Also, there is a sale on the Loot Box, my merch store. So look below, look at the description, and there's a 15% off sale going on right now on all our t-shirts. I am wearing one of my favorite t-shirts, Fix Something Every Day. Basically, that's the chant I tell myself every morning when I get up. And you can get yourself a mug and other things as well, like this. All right, enough about that. Let's get to the show. Welcome to the show, Nuno di Carmo, who is a Docker captain, a technical writer for SUSE. You were at Rancher, right? Hello.
Hi everyone. Hi Bret. Thank you for having me. And yes, I'm a tech writer at SUSE, to spell it correctly, even though it's weird for me, not being an English speaker. But yeah, SUSE Rancher.
So
or Rancher by SUSE.
However you want to say it. Right, yeah. So for those of you that haven't noticed in the last couple of years, Rancher was purchased or whatever we want to call that word. We acquired by SUSE or SUSE, depending on where you are or how you say it. Someone will correct me in chat, because years ago someone corrected me on Ubuntu because I was saying Ubuntu, and someone was like, it's Ubuntu. So anytime I say something wrong
Okay.
in tech, if there's a correct way of doing it, I just realized I have my
Yeah, I'm
additional
quite
mic.
sure it's Zuza,
Yeah,
so it's okay.
Sousa.
I'm
Okay,
sure about
yeah,
the
sure.
pronunciation normally.
Yeah, and Sousa's been around a while. Like, they're one of the major enterprise Linux distros that I see out there in the wild especially when I'm working with European countries or companies that are in Europe. They
Yeah.
prefer that, and so it's an interesting partnership. And I've always been huge fans of Rancher, and now you have the insight on what's going on there. So we won't talk about ton about Rancher today, but we are going to talk about Rancher
Mhm.
Desktop. Where if you
Yeah.
haven't seen Nuno on the show before, he's basically like, I'm the Mac guy. He's the Windows guy. Like, he knows so much WSL, like day-to-day development on Windows. So if you have questions about being a developer, an operator, a
Mm.
DevOps engineer, any of those roles on Windows today, um, let, let's let's ask him all the hard questions.
Let's go.
Yeah, and I mean, really, a lot of this starts with WSL. I feel like it's hard to even talk about
Mhm.
developing on Windows today without WSL. Like, it hasn't been around that long, but and we've talked about it a dozen times on this show. I mean, we probably had a dozen episodes dedicated to WSL.
Which
Um,
is good.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, if we go back in history, right? We had
Mhm.
WSL. Well, I guess we're calling it WSL one now.
One. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a really good start. And it had limits, but it met a lot of needs. We were able to use it, and then Docker couldn't necessarily use it, but then WSL2
Yeah.
showed up, and
Mhm.
everything changed. And
Oh
now
yeah.
it's it it's sad for me on Mac because I went to Mac because it was more Unix like over a decade ago, right? I was on Windows back in the Windows 7 days, and I thought, man, this Mac, with this BSD based kernel, I'm going to go over there. That's where all the developers seem to be. And now it turns out that Windows is actually a better place to be.
Yeah. I mean, thanks to WSL, we will enter just a little bit. Like you said, we need to understand first what is WSL and how it enabled Microsoft Windows to finally be really on par with Mac nowadays. Um, if not superior, but I'll let you decide. Um, but yeah, WSL one, like you said, was like a translation layer, so it had its limits. I won't enter too much. We talked about in length, I think, the past episode already, but very shortly, it's like a translation layer. So at some point in time, you will met like roadblocks that are walls actually, and you cannot just overcome them. So during that time, Microsoft was working on Linux containers on Windows, actually, lcow, for the ones who remember them. And that was using technology of a sort of micro VM. So it's Hyper-V VMs, but like headless. Um, and the technology was so good developed and was really working fine that they brought like the idea of making like the trying to have like a Windows, sorry, a Linux userland fully on Windows, and this time with the VM. So the moment you reach a VM, so there's still potentially some limitations, at least some performances that are, let's say, impactful for quite some people. I will tell the truth, nothing is perfect, right? But WSL2 brought these like user lands and Linux really VM feeling to Windows. That's really what WSL2 did. And from there, like the solutions that are based now on WSL2 and the solutions that we can implement directly on it also uh, are just growing day by day, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's to the point. I think so. When we met on this show, we were talking earlier, like a year and a half ago, I think.
Yeah.
I think Windows 11 was relatively new, and we were talking about some of the new things like the GUI basically Linux GUIs on Windows and stuff like that. That just honestly was blowing my mind and still does, about the ability for you to transcend the OS barrier with GUIs is really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And there are still people out there that are using Hyper-V mode, or they're using Vagrant VMs, and
Yep.
not to like preach or bang the table soapbox moment, but if there's something about, I would love to hear from people that like if there's a reason that they've tried to adopt WSL2, somehow wasn't able to use it, and they're still using sort of
Mhm.
full VM, so I would consider sort of legacy virtualization on Windows desktop. I would love to hear from those people. I don't know if we have any of those people here. Ajay actually has a great question for you. What are the limits or max capabilities of Linux running in WSL? What is the major difference if using it in a VM box versus
Mhm.
WSL?
Again, it's micro. Okay, so it's a micro VM integrated in Windows. This means that you will have networking non capabilities. I'll turn it the other way, from the Hyper-V network. And right now they are trying to fix things there. Also, let's say the cross file system, it's good, but it's slow as we speak. Like if I try to write from WSL on Windows file system, I can, but it will be slow. Like if you just do like a git clone, it will take you potentially, if your repo is big, like ages, literally.
Yeah.
Um, so the advantages of a VM nowadays, uh, it's really isolated. One, sorry, I do the pinky. um, so it's fully isolated. Second, the kernel mechanics are different with WSL and um, a VM. This means that if I want to load, and that's my case, and actually one of my later blogs I explained that, but it's like if you want to load modules on Linux nowadays, you dynamically load them. That's it. Okay, in a VM, you
Right.
just load your modules, you mod probe whatever, and it's there. With WSL, the kernel resides outside kind of the VM. So the VM loads it, but it loads it in a way that if you want modules inside your WSL instance, you need to compile a kernel. So I've been there. Like my all my Linux friends that know that I'm Windows guy,
Yeah.
they never thought that I will tell them I'm compiling a kernel once a month, let's say, or something like that for tests. They're just laughing at me, seriously. But that's that's
we
the way currently.
Yeah, we're just jealous because Windows and Mac people can't compile their kernels, so
Yeah,
it's
exactly,
just cool to
exactly.
be able to
I
do that.
feel so sorry for you. Yeah, like having time, not waiting on a kernel that is building for 10 to
Hey,
20
look,
minutes.
20
Yeah,
years ago, it was the only way I could ever make Linux work, or FreeBSD or anything. So it's just amazing now that we have these options that we don't have to compile. So it's pretty great.
yeah. But
Um,
anyway, so
yeah,
that's the this mechanism of really the kernel behavior or how you interact with the kernel. But once you know that, well, a VM will take RAM more than WSL because again it's a micro VM and it's kind of like loading inside the RAM that you have, and still you can like put limits, which is good. Like initially you didn't have any limits, they saw that it was not a good idea very fast, so now there's limits. The CPUs, you are using all the CPUs available also because it's again co-loading with your Windows kernel, so you are like leveraging your material. And of course now there's the GPU, so it's you don't see like the GPU per se. So if you do like a list LSPCI, sorry,
hmm
uh, you will not see your NVIDIA or your AMD card. However, if you run like NVIDIA SMI that checks like for the workloads and what's it's available, it will. show you that you have that you have like NVIDIA working behind the scenes, and
Right.
NVIDIA is working with Microsoft with the drivers and everything.
Right. So there's
So,
some magic there to
oh yeah,
accommodate for the WSL. I hate to use the word emulation because that maybe isn't the right word, but the yeah,
it's
the
kind.
the
I see that like a kind of pass through, but
okay.
for just the workload. So you
Yeah.
send your workload, your AI workload, your ML workload, because that's the goal here, right? And you send it, and it normally takes it on your GPU. But that's really like, uh, what do you prefer? Like, if you need isolation, go for a VM, like full isolation, go for a VM. If you want to be like quick and you want interoperability between the two systems, between the two user lands, right, Windows and Linux, go for WSL2.
Yeah, and we're getting some good questions. Yeah, Ajay is talking to Nadir. I see your questions. We'll get to those in a minute. Um, I think like one of the things that we all had, right? Like when we were all running VMs and we were running Linux VMs and stuff inside of our, whether it was Vagrant via VirtualBox or VMware Workstation or whatever, um, we all had our habits. And some of us, like I knew a team that up until just recently was still deploying a Vagrant VM to their Windows developers, and they would do all development inside the VM file system. So when we start talking about file systems, it is a little tricky because now what we're talking about is you have your host file system, you have your VM file system, and then you have the file system in your container. So there's all these like infinite layers down, with the turtles all the way down or whatever. And the in their case, they essentially were using special IDEs or ways for the IDE to get into the VM so that they
Hmm.
were working in the file system of the VM. But it was like if they had a file on their host and they wanted to get it in there, it was arduous, right? It was complicated. It was
Yeah.
confusing to figure out, okay, what directory do I need to put it in so that I can then see it, and then I need to move it from inside the thing. And as you mentioned earlier, like anytime you have files on one file system and you're bind mounting or network sharing or socket sharing or however the files are actually getting into the other OS, if you're sharing these files across OS, there's always a huge hit in performance. I have students that they never notice this because maybe they have small projects. They're doing bind mounts. Maybe they're doing bind mounts from the
Hmm.
Windows file system into the Linux VM for WSL, or they're on Mac like me, and that's all we have. We can bind mount our source code from our host machine into the
Right.
container, and there's always a performance penalty there, but not everyone sees it. I would say honestly, probably only 10 or 20% see that such a huge performance hit that they're like, okay, I need to fix this problem, and that usually leads them down the road of, oh, I need to probably start putting my code in this VM that I'm running, right? Like whether it's the VM workstation OS or it's WSL2. So this kind of leads me to like the PSA or the soapbox moment for you of like, let's make sure that we're setting up ourselves if we're using WSL2.
Yeah.
Let's set ourselves up
That's
for success. And how do you do that?
right. So, yeah, I can show you. Maybe it will be like I can talk and type. All right. Everyone can see my screen.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, so yeah, so I opened a file here. I will be speaking about like quickly about the configurations. But the first thing is like, from here, I'm on Windows PowerShell, and I will talk a little bit about my customization here. Let's take Tumbleweed for now. All right. So when I'm in Tumbleweed, okay, I'm in my home, like my Linux home. Now, when I'm on PowerShell, you can see here that I'm on my home on Windows. But it means that this pass here, actually, I can um, from WSL, I can go there, okay, and I can list my files. So it's a fresh VM. I don't have anything to hide here. Let me go directly to, I don't know, like documents, for example. Okay, so I don't have much there. So now let me, for example, create first with VI, just a test. Okay, I create a test. Hello all, happy to be here. Okay, and the magic here, I know how to quit Vim. So that was just my showcase of the skills today. I'm good now.
We're done.
Yeah,
Ta-da!
we're done. We're done. So
Well, and just to remind people, in case you're just now joining, what one of the things you're showing here is that you're inside. Okay, so first off, you're using Windows Terminal, right?
yes, indeed.
Okay, so my favorite terminal, I don't know about you, Windows Terminal is fantastic. Get it on the Windows Store. You can download it from GitHub. It's from Microsoft. It should replace all other GUIs, all terminal GUIs, the old PowerShell GUI. We basically had this old thing that's been around for 20 years in Windows, and Windows Terminal, especially in Windows 11, because I think it now ships with Windows 11, right?
Yeah, but okay, it will launch also like terminal. Yeah, because I don't have.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Windows 11
Anyway.
is a little more aggressive at guiding you towards the Windows Terminal future.
Yeah, you can set up, but yeah. So yeah, I was in WSL. So I launched a distro that I have. I have many. I will show you, but I have many distros. So I picked one, Tumbleweed in this case, and I wrote, thanks to VI here, I wrote a text into a file. Okay. Now this file from the Explorer here, I can go and you will see if I open it with NotPads, for example, just once for now, I can see here is my text. Okay. Can I? Yeah. So, and it's good. It's nice. It's just a text, like I said. So you don't see anything that is like cumbersome. It's actually pretty useful. But again, one thing that you said, it was like how to start well with WSL and on Windows. And the major issue that people do, for example, is to use WSL to write their projects, or to use WSL and their project file system, their project directories are on the Windows side. So like I said, do you have a Git by heart, like a repo that is medium size?
Oh yeah,
Sorry,
let's see, git clone.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, GitHub / Bret Fisher, BRETFISHER /HTT, no C in Fisher.
Oh, sorry, yeah,
That's okay.
My bad.
It's
My
a
old
habit.
colleague.
Yeah, and then HTTP-ENV.
Just like that.
Yeah, ENV. Yeah, HTTP-ENV. Yeah. Yep.
All right. So let's put us like a time. Oh yeah, of course.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know
So
what?
you set up a fresh new WSL.
Yeah. So let me go somewhere else to Ubuntu.
So by the way, I don't know if you all just saw what he did, but Windows Terminal, another advantage is that we're going to get some of these quick facts out of the way. So WSL, it's not installed with Windows by default, but you can enable it. I think there was a question about security. I personally don't have any. I've worked with security teams, security companies. They're all using WSL2. That is their default modus operandi, or however you would pronounce that. The Latin of the basically, that's how they get things done. So I personally, as someone who works in DevSecOps, I don't have concerns about WSL because it is very locked down and minimal. It is not necessarily a isolated VM in the case that you can make a truly isolated VMware workstation thing where it's literally just like there is no shared file system, there is no shared memory. It is dedicated, but I consider it an extension of your Windows file system and an extension of your Windows host. So you can install it through the store and you can choose your distributions. You can have multiple distributions, And I'm a little fuzzy on the details of how you would like share files between those distros, because don't they like they all have their own file system mounts, right? So if you had one or the other, like if you had an Ubuntu and
yes, but they do have one in common. Good question. So yeah, we cannot really see, but I think we can already think. Like this is less than 1 second. This is 2 seconds. The same Git clone on the two different um, file systems, one on Windows and one local.
right.
The local one is a VHDX actually, so it's a Hyper-V virtual
Hyper-V
disk,
compatible,
and that's why it's quite fast when you work there. So your point was that the tooling now before was really complicated, but nowadays the tooling is quite good. So let me go back here. And one of the tooling, a stupid thing is like I can call notepads .exe, so that's important. Okay, so you
yeah,
will need to.
got to put in the
I
.exe.
press tab and he provided notepad, and I will be writing now like Linux file directly on my now this time on my WSL instance. Okay, and here it says like, okay, your file doesn't exist. He wants to put the txt because it's notepad, and I will say okay, hello from notepads on WSL2, and I will save it. Okay, and now we have a problem. Here you can see that it's created with I think I can do this
With the Windows line
no
feed.
that was sorry, that was not what I wanted. Come back, it was not Windows M, come on. Okay, I'll just use this one then, it's okay. And let me zoom. So here you can see
Yeah.
It's Windows Plus, not M. I'm stupid. Okay, I'm good now. So the thing is like it created like that, so it can cause issues for the ones who already work with Windows files created on Windows, and with the issue of having now, if you read it, I don't think we can, but if I do you will not see it, but like if there's special characters here, the return will be like caret a big M, for example, so it will be some character that it doesn't know. So the thing is like if I do like Linux file or touch, even let's see, touch Linux file 2, and now I call notepad again on this Linux file 2. No, okay, so it doesn't work like I like, but we can do the same.
Yeah, so probably if you created a file in VI and then opened it in Notepad. And what we're really explaining here is that, a couple of things. People are noticing, like Ajay noticed, okay, so Windows executables are accessible from this Linux shell. And what's interesting is that if someone goes back in time, we actually had like 20 years ago, I don't know if it was Eric or who I was talking with. Maybe we were talking at CIVO Navigate down in Florida. We were talking about how we had, actually, it might have been Matt Williams that was a part of that stuff, but we had Windows. It was something like, it was called the Linux subsystem for Windows or something like that. And it was actually Linux tools built as Windows binaries. And you were able to use a POSIX-like shell environment, like Bash or whatever, inside a Windows server. But it was a really weird environment because it was a Windows file system. It was in TFS, so you weren't seeing, it was pretending to be in Linux, but it wasn't. It was still running Windows binaries on a Windows kernel. And this is totally different. This is, I get to do both. I get to run I can run executables from here, and it essentially passes them over to Windows execution. Or if I run Linux-built binaries, like a curl or something, it's going to run it on the Linux kernel, and it just kind of all works. I think that's one of the points of why WSL exists, is that it's more than just a VM with a Linux kernel that you can get a shell into. There you
Yeah,
go.
totally. And it's not, yeah. So sorry. Yeah, I switched distros also, and I didn't configure Ubuntu. But yeah, anyway. So here you can see that now even Notepad is aware of the line endings and can be
Right.
like a Linux line endings, Unix line ending.
And if you've
So
ever
yeah,
worked in a team that had non-Windows developers, like this was a problem on day one, right? Like
oh yeah,
someone on a Mac or on a Linux desktop would create a file in the repo, and then someone on Windows, it would look different to them in their editor, and then they would save a new file, and then it would really be messed up for the Mac people. So luckily, we have a Git config file that we can all sort of set for Git to manage line endings for us, or use an editor config. If anyone doesn't know about that, editorconfig.org, I think, is also another great way to manage that. That's a great point, though, because it really is Linux, and it really is Linux
yeah,
tools. So
exactly. So before we talk about containers, because we are here for that, right? Two things. So the tooling, what we were saying. So before, you will maybe do a SSH if your tool will permit you to create like the SSH to a remote server and try to connect there right from there directly. You have limitations most of the time. So now the tooling like Visual Studio Code, and not only like Go JetBrains, the suite JetBrains, Goland, and the Java one, the bigger one, JetBrains.
oh yeah, JetBrains.
Yeah, but yeah, their flagship editor, it can connect directly to WSL, so it's WSL aware. So quickly, one more thing, maybe, so I can explain why it's aware. I can show you
Yeah, that's a
is
good
that
point. Like you're saying, all the major editors support
yeah,
the WSL environment, because ideally you want your editor. I mean, what we're really saying here is you want your editor. Oops, wrong screen. You want your editors ideally to be Windows editors, so you get that full Windows GUI experience and the richness of that. But you probably want your code to be in WSL on that file system. Somebody just
exactly,
I had a question earlier. I just want to get it out because I think it's a good segue right here. Someone was asking essentially, what about the file system and how does it? Yeah, that was Ajay. And like you said, this is all sitting in a VHDX. Is that right? Which is
exactly, exactly,
if you didn't know this, if you ran a server farm of Windows servers like VHDX, and before we had just VHD files,
exactly,
this is essentially what all virtual machines on servers and production are all using. It's a very performant file system storage in a file, and you can mount it on Windows, even in Server Manager or some of the other the Disk Manager GUI. You can actually mount these files as real file systems in Windows. There's even a thing where you can boot to one without. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with them, but this is a standard file format. It is all just encapsulated essentially, so you don't have some sort of weird proprietary environment. It's not literally creating another partition on your hard drive, right?
exactly.
On your Windows host. This all just looks like a single file, but when you get into Linux in the WSL, it's all there. So.
Yeah, so here I'm going the inverse way this time. So from Explorer, I don't know if you saw, like you have now like Windows 11 at least, and Windows 10. I think they brought it also. You will have this menu Linux here that will appear, and
Yeah.
then it will showcase all the distros. And here that's important to mention that it's not all the distros that are seen by um, uh, terminal, by the Windows terminal. That's all the distros that are seen by WSL, and I will show you the difference. And here, so I could go to Ubuntu and to the my home, and then I could open again the file that I created before with Notepad.
Yeah, and that's
So
way more convenient than before.
there's these two ways going back and forth, and I will try to put some expert tips then. Here, if you click on the bar, that's really important. You can actually call anything from here, from WSL localhost. So if I go back to my shell, but this time PowerShell, I can
Okay.
actually
So we're on the
see
host.
the
Yep.
yeah my WSL local host, and I will call Ubuntu, and then now you can see that okay, it loads, I guess, like a
Mm.
module,
Yeah.
the file system module, and now you can see that I'm inside Ubuntu. And if I go to home, so it's funny because I'm doing tab, and it's giving me like the normal backslashes from
Yeah.
Windows, but I'm really inside
Yeah.
a Linux file system. So yeah, like at some point in time, you have to be really careful because you can get lost very fast
Yeah.
with the tooling. But like the goal is this one, like we are doing ourselves. It's kind of WSL the hard way. The WSL, the simple WSL, the it's like you run, for example, your codes. I have insiders here, and I can run codes on the HTTP env, for example. And now notice, yeah. So here it's aware that I'm running it like that, but it's not perfect. Okay, so okay, he wants to download Git and everything. So like I said, it's a fresh VM, but it's not really perfect. That's not really the way that I want to access, even though I can, right? It's
Right.
cool. But the thing is, like, I'm writing from a Windows perspective, so from a Windows point of view. What I really want is that my tooling connects and would run directly. So here, look, I'm pressing the control caret or backtick, sorry, and
Yep.
here you can see that I'm running PowerShell. But I want to I mean I started it from WSL, so I want to be on WSL. So gladly for us, they created, and it's Microsoft, they created some plugins, add-ons, and here I can run my WSL add-on that was not installed, so I can install it. Now it's done. And we recommend to use a WSL window, exactly. So now I can reopen my folder, but in WSL mode. And please look here. Let me zoom again. Here, that's the connection of like you can read like open remote window. So from there, let me close everything again because the pop-up disappeared, and let me run it again. And now look what it does. It installs like the VS Code server. So the backend is now running on WSL, and my front end is the front end that I know. And again, look here, is no more backslash whatever. No, now I am in the mindset of WSL of Linux. So I'm working like if I was working on Linux. And if I open again the shell, now I have my shell. Now I feel like I'm really working in a singular mode. I don't have to think about pass, completions, shells, or whatever. No, I'm on WSL. My tooling, my UI is Windows, but my backend is connected to a backend running on WSL. And
Yeah, and you can
here,
even see it there. Yeah, you can even see which
yeah.
VM or which WSL
Oh,
instance you're
yeah.
in. Yeah, and
So,
this is super great too because I think this is a common struggling point for people that are getting into Docker as a way. Surprisingly, a number of people take my course on Docker and they're new to VS Code. They're also new to WSL. So there's a whole lot of learning all at the same time, right? And one of the
exactly.
challenges is all this stuff works so well together, but if you veer outside of this ideal solution, let's call it, um, it can get a little weird and a little funky and a little confusing.
Yes.
So, in general, if you're coming from Windows 7, if you're coming from the older setups and you're now on Windows 10, Windows 11, you're enabling WSL2, you've maybe downloaded Ubuntu or OpenSUSE, um, you've done one of those things, and now you have this. And you installed Windows Terminal. If you're on Windows 10, if it's on Windows 11, I think it's already there. But Windows Terminal is that GUI. It's going to show you automatically your WSL options, which different distros you've installed. And then when you first run that, it's going to ask you for a username and password because that's going to be your Linux account because it's a real Linux account on a real Linux kernel. But there's no SSH involved. There's no necessary. You don't need to bridge the file systems or run PowerShell on your local machine, and then like you're showing all the cool stuff. Like you can do that, but really the ideal setup, and this is what I teach in my courses, like you're saying, is what we all want to get to is you open up WSL, the shell, like a bash shell in Ubuntu again, one of these different distros. You clone your repos in there in Linux. And then you start, like you said, you can just type code space dot, and it will open up that directory in your Windows GUI, not in a Linux GUI, but in your Windows GUI with all the great Windows advantages. And with code, and like you said, I think JetBrains, the other ones all sort of do this now too. Yeah. They understand WSL, so it seems like you're running on a Linux. It's almost like you're this weird hybrid of all the advantages of Linux desktops, all the advantages of a Windows desktop. And if you do that mode, you get the best file system performance. You get the wonderful GUI, and you're saying it's running this magical WSL VS Code server in the background on Linux. By the way, this is the same way we can all do this same setup with a code space on GitHub or a remote dev server. VS Code has that. Of course, I think all the other ones, all the other big IDEs have that as well now. But heck, even if you're a Vim user, you still have tmux. Like you can still use tmux over SSH and still have remote dev environments. But there's a lot going on here, so I don't want to trivialize for those that are new to this. Before we go to the next thing, I want to get through some of these questions because people have been patient. Ajay is mentioning SSH, by the way. Is there a reason to SSH into WSL? Is that even a thing? Why would you do that?
So yes, we have to be real aware. So the more we scratch the surface, the bigger the hole is, of course. And here is that Windows, maybe a little known fact for people that are not working on Windows, but if you are in developer mode on Windows, Windows by default will run a SSH server in the backend for potentially some services that it needs, and you can configure it and run it. So the port 22 is by default used. Sometimes for the tools that was previously, like when we didn't have this connectivity of having VS Code that can connect remotely, JetBrains that can connect remotely, you can run a SSH server on your WSL distro. And what it does, it's like WSL has this interoperability also in ports. So it will forward the ports that are open by default. You can stop that, but by default, it will share the port with the local host of Windows. So if you have some setup going on, you can easily or more easily connect to your, let's say, Windows machine, for example, through SSH on WSL. So you SSH your Windows machine, but what it does is like you are SSHing to the Windows machine WSL distro that is running the SSH server. And when now I think it's a bit better, but at some point in time, configuring SSH on Windows server, for example, was kind of difficult because you have to run scripts to adapt permissions and everything. So the easy way will be to go directly with SSH on WSL, indeed. But again, you can run it, but you just have to be really careful because it's one VM. How I didn't explain it, but I really want to address the point because it's already.
Yeah, that's true. It is one kernel, right? All these different ones
exactly.
You're running.
So that's one VM. So let me show you then.
Because that was a good question. I saw that question too. Just came in. Yeah. How can you Arnamu? I'm not sure how to say that. How do you make a fresh WSL VM essentially?
So whenever you call WSL, now I'm listing verbose, and here is like all the WSL distro that are running. again, that's not the same. You cannot see it because I modularized it. But for example, here you can see Docker desktop data, for example, here, and you will not find it on the menu here because that's just a data distribution. Like Rancher desktop data is the same. That's distros that are not really distros. They are just here to share files. So I don't really want to work with them. But still, they are distros. And here you can see like Ubuntu, Podman machine also is running currently. But at the end of the day, there's only one machine running. So let me actually run Tumbleweed again. So here I have Tumbleweed, I have Ubuntu, and if I'm a bad guy, which I am, and simply shut down WSL, okay, it will relaunch because of Podman, but here you can see that Tumbleweed got destroyed and Ubuntu got also disconnected, destroyed if you want. So this means that behind the scenes, behind the scenes, there's only one. So let me again do a WSL-L-V just to ensure that, yeah. So Ubuntu is running again. Good. So now, if I use a tool called HCS Diag, which is like I think it's like Hyper-V communication, no, control system diagnostics or whatever it stands for, and I do lists. Now you can see that I have here the micro VM running behind the scenes, but you can only see one. So
Right.
let me open again Tumbleweed. Let me open. I'm clicking on purpose, by the way, because you can see that I have like these shortcuts.
Yeah.
But I'm a Windows guy, so I'm going for by the menus. I like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so
So you're
and
starting up
here,
all these different.
yeah,
Okay. So yeah. Okay. So you're showing. Yeah. It's still just a single VM. Yeah. Cool.
okay. So that's really one VM at the end of the day.
And that's something that
Uh,
happened years ago, by the way, for those that are catching up from like the early days of Windows 10 WSL, is that they removed the need to have Hyper-V even installed in order to get your WSL2 setup going. And that's how we can have like Windows 10, Windows 11 Home, and these various editions that don't come with the full enterprisey Hyper-V
exactly.
setup. We don't actually need that anymore. So I had to change all my course videos because I used to have to tell people, well, if you're on a home
Hmm.
version, this is how you're going to have to do it. And you're going to have to use, if you remember Docker Toolbox back in the day. And but now Docker Desktop works everywhere. It works on every edition, all versions, and we get all these features in WSL2 regardless.
Yeah.
Yep.
The magic here is this one, virtual machine platform, and that's the what they ported to the Windows Home editions.
Nice.
So you
Yeah.
still have virtualization, but it's like very lightweight virtualization. You will not have the Hyper-V, for example, there.
Yeah. Lee, by the way, asked earlier, what does mount show in Linux if you were to run the mount command? Does
Oh
it
yeah,
show all
yeah.
the Windows file system and stuff like that?
Yes, good question. Shows a lot. Okay, so
Yeah. Well, there
first
are
of
containers
all,
involved, so it's always a lot.
yeah. So first of all, the C group is hybrid, which is no good, but soon we will have C group 2 finally. I'm pushing for it, so you can count on me. Then there's quite a lot of things here on MNT WSLG, which is for stands for graphic. That's where all the magic occurs for the GUI stuff. Okay, so let me go here. Do I have like Gnome terminal? I will launch it, but yeah, okay, cool. I will launch it now, and potentially we will wait until it's because 400 megabytes. But let's keep it. Okay, sorry. And then we have all the normal mounts that we have here. So let me just now grep for /mnt, for example, And here we have the shared drive, like I told you, like the share mount, which is MNT WSL. All these toolings like Docker Desktop, Rancher Desktop, whatever, that wants some tooling that needs to be shared across all, like say the socket, for example. You don't want a socket on, like to configure a socket on every distro. So you put the socket in the shared mount, and then you just link it or tunnel it or whatever they do. So
Cool. I think Ajay's asked. He's got a lot of questions. The
good.
terminal, the terminal theme, isn't that just is that the default theme for Windows Terminal, or
Oh,
did you customize it?
yes and no. So first of all, it's the terminal preview.
Oh, you have the
Why?
preview.
Because yeah, I have the preview because if I go here and on settings, now they have this new tab menu where I can actually put my stuff in a different way. So that's
Yeah, so
why
that's where you
you
get the
don't.
the cascading
Yeah,
menu. Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, Chris
So
was it? No, who was it? It was Daniel. Daniel was saying Windows Terminal Preview is the one you want to install, and I was asking like, what does that do for us? So yeah, the preview gives you that extra feature. But okay, cool.
yeah, so it's the experimental features, like beta features, not really experimental, but more beta features that come in, and sometimes they're really nice. Then what you can do is like there's a website. If you type like Windows Terminal theming, and then you will be seeing that in color schemes, for example, I installed quite a lot more than what we have. So by default. So that there's that actually.
Yeah, nice. I like that.
But
I haven't checked all the recent features in the last couple of years because I don't use it every day. But that's it used to be just a config file. It's nice that we're now getting a little bit of a settings GUI.
okay, and here's Gnome Terminal.
Nice.
Okay, you can
Which would
tell.
probably
You can
not
tell.
give you the that would probably avoid the Windows line feed problems, right? Since it's a
Yeah,
Linux.
exactly, exactly, exactly. But here is like Gnome Terminal, but you can tell that it's like so it's the Gnome or Gnome, sorry, the Gnome UI. Okay, so there's rounded, but you can tell by the look and feel that it's not Windows at all. And one thing is like if I try to take a screenshot of a window, you see the borders,
Mm,
they're a
yeah,
bit more. So that's how you can tell. So if I compare it with what? Well, with the terminal, for example. Again, you see, like here,
yeah.
the border is
That's interesting.
okay. So just in case you want to take like screenshots. By the way, it was Windows Shift S, like screenshot, the
All right.
shortcut to have like the now the. So here you can see like it will take the whole border, and if I go check here, you can see that it took like a little bit more, because that's the real window. Because the what we cannot see here is that it's a remote desktop window that is directly loading the application. But as you can tell, it's like fully working great.
Very cool. Rich has a question. He works in WSL2 all day,
Mm.
using a single Ubuntu
Mm.
distro with VS Code. I save all data to Linux user home. What is the best advice to back up data and run multiple distros? Move.
Right. So I had a friend, Jason Shipwreck. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he is working for Solo now. And he actually destroyed his VM, his distro. So what I can show you is that, uh, let me see which one. It's okay. I would like really to showcase the others, but okay, Amazon. I didn't do anything with it, so let's start Amazon very shortly. Here we go. So okay, it's not even configured, so it's all good. So let me cd and touch my important file. Okay, and one day, for whatever reason, you kill Amazon. Sorry, you don't kill Amazon, but yeah. So now you don't have Amazon anymore. So I can go here if I want and try to launch it, and I will have an error. So I lost all my work. So first thing first is like, if you have Ubuntu by canonical directly from the store, uh, it will be in app data, some pass of obscure pass. But if you find the VHDX, save it, and like save it as much as you can, like maybe once a week, or do a sort of backup. That's a very good segue. I'm not paid by them, but they are friends. So there's Raft WSL, created by Penguin Group, and if you, so it's a paid solution, but you can run it for 2 weeks, for example, to have a glimpse. And from here, for example, if I take Ubuntu, they have the solution directly to actually take a snapshot. So you take a snapshot. I will call it the Bret Show, create, and it will actually save my all my data into this snapshot. So now you kind of more safe. That's part of the, so it's called Raft. You can find it on the Windows Store. It's $14 a year, I think, but worse.
Do you know if in the background each one of these distros is its own VHDX file, or is this all
Yes.
captured?
No, they have all. Yeah. Good question. So here, like, I wrote like it was like I have the distro ones, but I have the custom ones, and the custom ones I put them all in the same place. And we will go there. So I tend to myself to create a slash WSL distros. Okay. And okay, it backed up it. Cool. And here it will create every time that you import. Okay, maybe it's not the best theming right now. But yeah, okay, I don't want to lose time. If I do dear Amazon, the one that I killed, so there's nothing there. And if I go check Arch, now you can see that I have the X4, and it's like 500 megs approximately. And if I do the same with Wolfie from ChangeGuard, uh, way smaller, and it has his own VHDX. So yes, and that's why I tend, and that's just me. That's not really, let's say, a best practice or anything, but I tend to import my distros myself because I know where I put them, and any case I can simply like save them. And the best thing is now, very shortly, is now that you can import distros based on VHDX also. So you can export it in
Yeah.
VHDX and then re-import it as VHDX.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I was because I was watching that little raft or whatever it was thing you were showing, and I was thinking, in the
Yeah.
background we've had the Windows file system snapshotter for a long time. If these are just VHDX files, uh,
Yeah.
like there's probably someone who's created a gist on like a couple of commands that would easily snapshot, export, and yeah, so it's all
But
probably there.
actually, yeah. So now, if I go just here, but it's like you can export. Um, if you do export, you can export directly the VHD. So you can make like with WSL now, you are able to do WSL dash dash export which distro, your file name, or dash dash VHD, your file name, and then if something goes wrong, you can import it, and there's like a VHD also here.
Nice, yeah, it's getting easier.
Oh yeah.
And there was a question of yeah, so we've got several people in chat. I see you people all saying, yeah, I've destroyed my distro, I've messed up. It's happened. This
No
happens, right?
chance. Yeah.
It happens all the time to me where I'm I'm in a container. I'm messing around, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to leave this right here, and I'll come back later. And then Docker comes out and says, hey, we need you all to test a new beta. And then I just do a system clean, and I'm like, oh yeah, I lost it. I lost it all. Yeah, I don't usually lose the source code, but whatever I was working on, it was built. I've done that too. There is that risk, but I would hope that nowadays, like WSL2 has been out for a while now, I would hope that if any of us had like enterprisey or cloud-based backup tools that for Windows, I would hope that those would at least support WSL.
That's something that people don't really think about. That's the problem. Is like, again, it's an OS inside an OS kind of. So you have to still think a little bit more about how to save it, your tooling. That's why, and again, I really recommend you to save the VHD and continue working on WSL rather than starting to actually move all your work files into the Windows file system, for now at least. Okay, because that's one thing, is like once you lose once or even twice your distro, then you start getting frustrated because you lost files, you lost configurations, whatever. So what you do is like you try to move out of WSL for your files, and that's a bad calculation in the long term.
Yeah. And another question that was asked earlier around, is it a way from one distro to create multiple WSL distros? I don't know how to ask that question even. Basically,
no, you can, but it's the name. Yeah, I know what it means.
Like two different Ubuntu's of the same version
exactly.
From the store, but the store doesn't make this obvious. The store kind of.
No, so via the store, you cannot really. The only thing that you can do with Ubuntu is like install Ubuntu itself, like without the name, and which is 2204 right now. And then you install Ubuntu 2204, which has another name actually, and because you cannot install twice the same name actually, right? So let's say Wolfie. So let me take Wolfie here. Like if I try to re-import Wolfie as it is, as I did before, it will say like, no shot. Like you have a distro that has already the same name. However, with exactly the same file, which is this one here, the last one, okay, exactly the same file in a different directory, that's just for a better management, but with a different name. And again, the import here, the important part is this one here. Okay, so if I import it, it will import it. And now I have Wolfie. Sorry, I'm going a little bit more fast, but it's like
no, it's good.
I'm just Wolfie. Okay, and if I go Wolfie 2, I go Wolfie 2. And if I cd touch test, I exit, and now I go to Wolfie cd, and I list. Sorry, too fast. There's no file. Okay, so it's really separated, but the naming is really important. The naming here is the one thing. So
yeah, so it's really, I see what you're saying. So it's really just it's kind of like Docker containers can't have two with the same name, and it's just not giving us that option in the store, but we can easily do it from the command line by is that essentially what you're doing with importing and export? So at first someone would have to export their current one and then re-import it? Okay.
Exactly. So here, if I search for Ubuntu, then you will have Ubuntu itself without any other naming. That's the one that I installed. As you can see, it's marked open. But then I have the 2204.2 LTS. Okay, that it's not installed, but that's exactly the same, actually. And then if you really want to be on the edge, there's the Ubuntu preview somewhere, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if it's true, but I always looked at the Ubuntu one as like that didn't have a version number. That was basically whatever the most recent LTS is what
LTS,
you're getting.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
and
basically
Ubuntu preview is the latest one.
Yeah. Okay. That's so okay. Enough about the Ubuntu and the WSL. I think we had great questions, people. Everyone's been great. This is actually a kind of an interesting dive into the understanding of WSL, because the reality is if you're working in this thing all day, like you really want to understand some of the nuances and the management. And I didn't know about the backup feature through export or the tool you mentioned. But we're running out of time. But one of the other things we wanted to talk about was sort of now the rich ecosystem and options we have, not just Docker Desktop, which is still my favorite. It's still great. It's still the one I install on every single Mac, Windows, Linux desktop I have. But we have these other ones. And I don't know if we had this spreadsheet when you and I were back a year and a half ago. I feel like we did.
You created it afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. So we have this spreadsheet that you've been helping out with. And the purpose of this spreadsheet was really to showcase how much Docker Desktop does, because it does a ton of things. And if you just scroll, you can see every feature I've added. It doesn't mean that, there's probably other features that exist in all these products that I'm not listing, but also to show what other options there are besides Docker Desktop if you just want to play around, if you are not allowed to run Docker Desktop due to licensing reasons, or you work at an enterprise that would have to pay for it, or you're someone who's just interested in other technologies, like you are a Podman person, and Podman Desktop even can run extensions from Docker Desktop. It can do the same thing. So, and we've got Rancher Desktop that's been around a long time. It allows you to do some things like control Kubernetes versions and stuff that Docker Desktop can't do. Which I don't even, that is one of the features I have over here is, can you change Kubernetes versions? And you can't in Docker Desktop, but you can in Rancher Desktop. So check out, for those that didn't know, check out that spreadsheet. You can add comments if you're someone who knows a tool really well in this list, or if you happen to know of a tool that's not in this list. We're focusing on local container runtimes to allow you to run a container, which may or may not be Docker or Kubernetes. It could be Cryo, Container D, Podman, any way to run a container on your local system. This isn't for production. This isn't Kubernetes runtimes. This isn't CRI specifically. This is, how can I run containers locally on my host, my physical machine? And we have an increasingly large growing list. A lot of people are fans of Lima Nerd Control, made by the same people that also maintain Docker and Moby. A lot of us have heard of Multipass and Minikube and Podman. We now, since the last time you and I hung out, we now have Podman Desktop.
I have it. So I can really show. Yeah. So finish, and I will quickly show 3 solutions then.
Yeah. Well, so I just wanted to warm us up to the idea that there's all these other options. We have. I need to just put the links into all these. We have Rancher Desktop. We've had that for a while now. And I have both. I have all these installed locally on my machine. I check them out every once in a while. I admit I have a creature of a habit, so I was using Docker Desktop long before all these, so I tend to still use Docker Desktop.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about some of the stuff. There is tons in Docker Desktop that we can talk about, but we also just want to highlight some of the other ones. So let's go.
Yeah, let's go. So the first one. I will finish with Docker Desktop. I have 3 demos with Docker Desktop quickly. Sorry for the time. WSL2 took too much time. So
no, it's fine. It's good stuff. People were asking. So
good. So Podman Desktop arrived this year or past year. Maybe a small story behind is that someone else from the community created actually the Podman Companion, I think it was called, and was really nice. And then the team behind Podman actually created an official Podman Desktop months after it. So the interface seems quite the same, so they might work actually with the lead developer of the other solution. But yeah, so from here, okay, dashboard, I'm not running anything, so you won't see anything. From here, you can run containers. Podman is something maybe people don't really realize, but was created also for running pods locally, not on Kubernetes by itself. So you can run pods directly with Podman, which is quite nice. Then you have images here, and then the volumes. And in terms of settings, is a bit more, let's say, they have good settings, but seems a bit more archaic compared to the other two that we'll see just after. It's more like pure developer interface here. You have to know exactly what you have to enter
Right.
somewhere. Like
Right.
there's no menus, there's no nothing. So, but still really good. You have the Podman machine, which is the actually the one that is really working behind the scenes. So since Podman 4, Podman machine is aware of WSL, so you can run Podman machine and create actually a new machine. Let me see, where am I here? Okay, so here I have Podman. Okay, and if I do Podman machine list, maybe. Okay, hey, here we go. So here I have like a Podman machine default, and as you can see, the VM type is WSL. So it's aware, and meaning like everything that I will be running will be actually running in the Podman distro that it created, which is this one here. And something that I did here, I have container host. So let's go for the Podman machine, and I can now enter my host directly if I want. And if I do, oh yeah, sorry, cat etc os release, it's Fedora. So the funny stuff here is that Fedora and every Red Hat distros are not officially present in the Windows Store because of some licensing discussions with Windows, to put it uh, simply. And the thing here is like you can have your Fedora directly with Podman on Windows. So it works quite well. I mean, as you can see, if I exit here, yeah, I have to exit twice, but that's okay. Okay, let me exit everything here. Okay, cool. So Podman run dash dash rm hello world. Okay, he doesn't like it, but it's by default checking, and there's the hello world from Podman instead of the hello world from Moby. But yeah, so
Nice.
that's it. I like Podman and the team behind. I know like one of the developers behind really really helpful and always like wanting to help. So hi, I don't
Yeah.
remember his name, but
Very
yeah,
cool.
is really cool. Yeah, and so like you said, the one thing here is that it can run Docker desktop extensions. I won't do it right now. I tried it couple of them, but sometimes it doesn't really work well because Podman, even though it's like can run Docker commands, it's not 100% compatible. So
Right.
I tried for
The
Eric
Docker
actually.
API.
Yeah, so for Eric, I tried Sneak because I wanted to showcase it from here, and it simply didn't work because it doesn't understand the JSON output, for example. So,
Yeah.
so
Your
yeah,
mileage may vary, is what we would say on extensions. But it's just cool that they actually added that. I was impressed when I first saw that it can kind of like how there's all these variants of VS Code that comes from the underlying VS Code open source repos. And so we have the branded VS Code, and then there's like all these variants, and they can all still use the same extensions as that VS Code can use, or at least most of them. And so it's similar here, where there is Docker API compatibility for sure, and then there's also like an extension API that is probably not 100% coverage as Podman as well. But it's nice that they're even trying that,
yeah,
because instead of
and
inventing their own solution. Yeah. The
true,
fact that we're
true.
running,
I
by the
mean,
way, a Red Hat GUI, we're running Red Hat software or Red Hat sponsored software on Windows. The fact that that's even a thing is actually pretty cool, because Podman and everything else Red Hat is traditionally very Linux only. So you're not going to get a lot of support to run those tools on Windows, especially not in a
mhm.
GUI. So this is actually a pretty rare, in my experience, a pretty rare occasion for Red Hat.
So don't quote me there, but I saw kind of the path, like going from there was like this Podman machine connectivity, like you had the kind of the GUI. Oh, okay, thank you, Eric. I don't have chocolate for you though, but yeah. So it's using like it was using Podman Machine, but like as a remote UI if you want, and actually CLI. But yeah, it was connecting there, and then suddenly Podman Machine became aware of WSL, and finally now we have Podman Desktop. So yeah, but definitively like that's why Red Hat for me it's sometimes a bit a mystery. I don't know them. I don't have the whole history. No, neither. I came after
Mm.
everything maybe happened. So I like Red Hat. I like their product, but sometimes it's like yeah, they don't follow like the standards, or they create something on the side and they try it all the time. So they are innovating in their way. So that's quite cool. Anyway, Rancher Desktop by Zusa. Rancher. So this one, okay, I'm biased, right? Like I said, I work for them. I actually write the docs for them, so I'm a bit biased here. But it's the let's say it's the tool that I use now every day at work. I still use a lot Docker Desktop, and you will see for the demos because that's Docker Desktop still for me leads in terms of container purely leads the way in innovation. Rancher Desktop for me will and leads a little bit, but will lead really like on the Kubernetes front, really about like this. You can do almost everything that you want with containers, but on top of it, and majority, let's say, we do have this Kubernetes front there. So we have like images as before, but by default, for example, we can also scan them. That will be Trivi by Aqua. There's a troubleshooting diagnostics also here, and one of the other one that I really want to show, something that Podman didn't do is like Podman doesn't integrate with any WSL, so you have to work on PowerShell. So there's no exporting commands, sharing commands like Docker Desktop and Rancher Desktop does. Okay, the tooling behind of Rancher Desktop consists of if you have the container engine here. I switched to Docker D, but I won't do the demo unfortunately. But I have a demo with K3D where you can extend the power of Rancher Desktop to a multi-node. But the thing is, if you are running Containerd, you will have nerdctl, the tool that you have with Lima, okay, and that will be nerdctl 3v. I'm missing one. Containerd, of course, behind the scenes, and another one, yeah, Lima. And then you can swap the container engine. The fun thing here, which I like very much, is that Rancher Desktop reach it's like still challenger compared to Docker Desktop in terms of features on the purely container environment. Okay, but at the same time, by the from the beginning, it was like the three OSs were targeted, and the two container engines were also there already. So now that Docker Desktop did it, also now finally we can see like okay, they see potentially I don't know someone as a bit not challenging, but like a not in a bad way, but like a good competitor, like a sane competitor. And then Docker Desktop also brought like the dual engine, and we will see that just after. And one thing that you said before, we can actually swap the Kubernetes versions, which is kind of cool. One last thing here, there's the allowed images. For now, it's experimental, but for example, you can just allow certain images to be pulled. Uh, so Docker has it, but for the enterprise solution.
The
Yeah,
the way that I actually kind of perceive the Docker desktop versus Rancher desktop discussion is like Docker desktop is kind of meant to just you install it, and a lot of its settings and functionality is sort of like a developer focused workflow. Things like which extensions you want to add, and
Yeah.
maybe do you want this to start? I mean, it's all these things that are sort of like a developer that has an awareness of containers. But to me, Rancher Desktop is like the tool for someone who really wants to dig in and be involved with containers. They want to try a different command line. They want to swap their runtime in the back end. They want to change the Kubernetes version. These are all things you can't do in Docker Desktop, because Docker Desktop is just trying to give you the happy path approach of, hey, this is everything you know and love, and we just do it all in one shot.
Exactly.
And then Rancher Desktop's like, we allow you to toggle all these different knobs that you may not even. Some people just don't care about, right? They just want Docker. They want Docker engine running on the background. They want to use Docker Compose. They want the latest version of Compose and Docker all just built together, and that's Docker Desktop. But to me, Rancher Desktop, whenever I want to run like my most popular use for Rancher Desktop, even though I've still got Docker Desktop running, is when a student says, I'm having an issue with this lecture on Kubernetes 1.22 or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can run it in K3D. There's all these ways I could spin it up. But Rancher Desktop GUI is just so easy for me to go, boop, have the drop down, pick the version, it installs it. A minute later, I'm ready to go. And
but
yeah,
I think you nailed it, and it was already said the last time, and thank you for repeating it. And that's why, I'm in I'm employee and I'm captain at the same time, so I have these split personality, right?
You're doing great.
Yeah, I'm split to the movie, that will be me. But anyway, so the thing is, I truly foresee use cases on, of course, that's a Venn diagram where you will have the middle that will be crossover. But like you said, the developer comes in and there's an abstraction, a full abstraction of what is working behind. I have to click some buttons and I have my environment working, Docker Desktop. The other one, it's more like, here is the tooling that you don't have to care no more about. We provide you the tooling. We provide you with some actually features on the UI, but you will have to go through CLI. Docker Desktop nowadays, potentially you can run compose files, you can have the dev environments, you can scan files without even touching a command line. So you just touch your code and that's it. So it's really focused to the developer, to the almost the extreme. And all this abstraction is a huge innovation and huge development. We take maybe it for granted. I don't. The more abstracted it is, the more thought was put into it. Rancher Desktop hopefully will become exactly the same for the Kubernetes world, where you abstract Kubernetes fully and you can just develop and push to Kubernetes. And the thing here is you have to understand we have an end-to-end mindset, the same for Docker in terms of developer. Here is more in terms of Kubernetes, where the mindset is that in production you have a specific version. You don't have latest. That's a no-no. Okay, so here you can pinpoint exactly the same Kubernetes version, develop for that version, debug on that version, and then push to the same version that is running in production. So it's more an end-to-end mindset around Kubernetes, more likely. And you can run also Docker and Containerd stuff, but for me it's how I like to present it, where the paths will kind of diverge from one and the other. But anyway.
Yeah. All right, we have time for one more demo.
You get
to pick the demo.
That will be okay. So I will go to the crazy thing then directly. Okay. So let me run Docker Desktop first. Yeah, I need to wait because they share Rancher Desktop share the same. Why Docker Desktop is the one that innovates again on the container front. Everything on Windows, the shared sockets between WSL. Okay, what I didn't show is Rancher Desktop is also running on a WSL version or a WSL distro behind the scenes, right? Docker Desktop is the same when I'm working on Linux. Okay, So here, let me just swap very fast to here. And now I hope there's Docker people, because that's the feature request. One thing that's from Windows side now that we forgot is that Docker is the best still today way to get Docker for Windows, like Docker containers for in Windows. So here, if I do a Docker info, hopefully it will come fast, please. Quick. Thank you. I'm running on WSL. Okay, so no big deal. If I do a Docker context list, I can see that I'm running. Okay, now I will have to do this one here like that. Yeah, kind of. Okay, so it's running two things. It's running default context, which is my Docker engine context, and mined the pipe here, but it's also running directly another pipe behind the scenes that is the Linux engine. That's cool, but let's now switch to Windows containers. Hopefully it will be fast. Okay, it's done. So let's us do again the same. And okay, now you can see the difference here. The engine is still the same. Okay, so if I do a Docker info again, this time I don't have WS. Okay, shouldn't come WSL. Just a second. Okay, didn't switch. Why?
Oh yeah. Do you need to switch your context? So like, is the default one always Linux?
Oh, okay, but yeah, okay, cool. So Docker. Okay, good point. Docker context. How is it?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was called.
Yeah.
Docker
Okay.
dash window or
But
desktop dash
normally
Windows.
the
Yeah.
engine, that's funny because normally the engine should swap to the Windows now,
Yeah.
and I should be info. Okay, and now I can see that I'm running on Windows. Okay, so here it's Windows Pass. That's the root dir, and again, if I do images, I just
Okay.
took the server core. Okay, so but potentially that's okay, that's cool. So it's working. So I broke it because that was my demo. It was to showcase how you can run both Linux and Windows at the same time. So if I do a Docker run again of Alpine, so it will be short, it will run, it will download it, and I'm running Alpine. Okay. But remember here, okay, let me put it here. Okay. I'm not on, I should be on Windows, right? So it means that I can run both contexts at the same time. So which is
So this is
cool.
two different engines, right? So we're technically running the Docker D.exe engine on Windows as a service, I bet, and then we're running the Docker Linux daemon inside of WSL2, and you're just using the context, which, by the way, for those that didn't know, like Docker's had this context command for a long time now. It's not very commonly used because we all tend to just SSH into things or whatever, but you can create a bunch of different contexts actually for a lot of different places, a lot of different types of connections. But in this case, you're swapping between engines using sockets. So this is actually different. This is actually the first time I'm seeing you do this. So I did like this was not something we prepared ahead of time. And this is a little bit different than what I remember back in the old days of LCOW when we were sort of using one engine, but it was sort of
Platform.
bridging between
Exactly.
platforms or something. Yeah.
Exactly. But here you don't have to, you are using, leveraging both containers on Windows as they should be, and you are leveraging WSL containers because the pipes are different. So the
Yeah.
connectivity to the engines that are running on the same time are totally different. And here, by default, when I will run Docker Context Desktop, so the server core, I pre-downloaded it because it would have taken
It's
too
big.
much
Yeah.
time. Yeah. So now let me run something called Process Explorer. It's from the C's internal team. And here, if I go to the most RAM used, I have this one here, 600 megabytes, that is being used by the new container. And remember the tool that I showed you before, it's even better. Now we can see that I'm running an Hyper-V container.
Oh, look at that. Yeah.
Okay. So that's cool. So that's what you should have been doing until now. But since 2000 or 2022, now I can add here an isolation called process. And now let me come here first. I go to the very bottom. I will try to put it here and look behind the screen when I will run it, and you will see I have inits. So I have processes now and no more a VM. And now you can tell there's the 14.156, and if I get process of PowerShell, I have the ID. So I can run also containers like the latest versions. That's really important. Windows is kind of picky, but the latest version of Docker Desktop on Windows with the Windows engine can run process mode also.
Yeah, and this is something that's been going on for a while too, right? Like we had to get, like, if you go back in time actually, because Docker started offering, or Microsoft Server started offering process and Hyper-V isolation in Windows Server 2016, if I can remember my dates correctly. And that wasn't originally even an option on Windows Desktop. We could not do process isolation.
Nope.
We always had to run things on Windows inside a Hyper-V VM that was
Exactly.
running core or whatever. So what you're showing here is a more efficient way if you're someone who's running, if you need to run Windows binaries in Windows containers and you don't want to have to
Yeah.
run an entire VM in the background with, the 1 or 2 gig OS download and all that, you can actually avoid that with this processor mode, right? Or isolation,
Exactly.
processor isolation. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, you need to be careful when it's process isolation. So it's still a container, but you are kind of in the outside now.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's almost
so
like
if you
privilege
want
mode.
pure isolation, yeah, you should run the normal isolation, which is Hyper-V.
And Microsoft documentation, the last I checked, it was a couple years ago, but Microsoft documentation for those that are this is like blowing their brains out right now. Like they're super. They're like, what is happening? There's actually good documentation that Microsoft explains Hyper-V versus process isolation. So
Yes.
you can
Yes.
you can. We're not going to pull that up, but you can probably just Google around like processor versus Hyper-V isolation. I've done that multiple times over the last half a decade, and you get a sense of what Microsoft's trying to accomplish. This is actually something that Linux doesn't do. This is actually something that Microsoft invented for containers on Windows, where they allowed you to have better isolation, which we can technically now do that in Linux with different container runtimes. But in Windows, it kind of comes out of the box, and I think it tends to default to Hyper-V isolation. But can't you change I think you could change the default. Actually, at least you used to be able to change
Yes.
to
Yeah.
do
Yeah. Yeah.
processor
You can.
isolation only. Yeah.
Yeah. So here I don't have anything anymore, but let me just quickly swap. So it's the last demo. Promise. After this one, I don't have anymore. I just want to swap the. Okay, WSL. Cool. I'm back. So here in features in development, now we can use containerd, and you have done it before, but the good thing is like now. Okay, sorry. If I go to our
So
dear friend
we're in
Michael
WSL2.
microservice.
Sorry, we're
Yeah,
in
again,
WSL2.
back.
We're back in Linux container mode. Okay.
And I can do a Docker compose up. It will share. Okay, it will open the port. Let me go to localhost exactly. And I have the demo. Cool. But remember that the demo here from Michael, Control Shift D to duplicate my tab. Okay, so it just to gain time. Um, so that's yeah, Docker file, I guess. The Docker file, yeah. Here we go. So that's the WASM uh, demo that they built at Docker. So I have on Windows, and that's how I want to finish. I have the possibility to have Linux containers, Windows containers at the same time, and thanks to Containerd now, I can also have the WASM containers all at once. So
So the three types, because
the
technically
three
WASM
types
containers are a different type of container that require a different part of the runtime,
runtime. Yeah,
a shim, which for those that are interested in WASM, we did a great show here in December. So go back in this YouTube, just search
exactly.
WASM Bret Fisher or something, and you'll find Nigel Poulton on the show, and we went through some like what is WASM, why do we care about it, and that's actually it's fun. I didn't know you were going to do a WASM demo, but it's a good point that you're now you're basically running to date the three different platform options, or I guess the three different OS options that we
Yeah,
have. In fact, if you think about it for a minute, we've always had this dash dash platform option, or at least for a very long time in Docker, and that allows you. And a platform in Docker, we should say, is a combination of the hardware chipset, so like ARM or Intel or mainframe or 386 or whatever, and then the OS that's running on that hardware. So whenever you do a Docker run on Linux, you're actually getting this platform decision, and it all happens in the background, and it's kind of magical, and it just defaults to whatever the engine is running on. If the engine's running on x86, it's going to download an x86 64 image, and it's going to be in a Linux binary compatible format. But we don't realize it in the background. If you're doing a Windows container, it's then a x86 64 slash Windows,
hmm
or actually it's the other way around, right? It's Windows slash x86 64 or AMD
yeah,
64 for most Windows people. But now we have this new one, WASM slash WASI 32, I believe is the platform name in there, right?
yeah. I think
Um,
yeah,
and it's
wasn't.
yeah, you're like super bleeding edge on this, so I'm appreciating us ending on the bleeding edge note because this is all like happening in real time. I'm stealing a little bit of your thunder. Sorry, I know you were going to probably explain WASM for
No,
a
no.
second, but
Oh no, 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 at all, at all.
yeah,
I know I can run it, so I'm not a dev. Like I said all the time, I know that I can play with it. So definitively, it's something that we should like bring, test it. And here again, if I want, I can create another context going when I'm in Linux now. I can create a context and go back to Windows also because the containers are potentially running and everything. So now the good thing is like I can harass some Docker devs to have Containerd on Windows, hopefully, as we have, because WASM, I have plenty of questions that are not really answered, but I will keep it for another show. But there's lots of demos that we can do. And again, just I hope like the Windows side, how it grew up to be, you can really do whatever you want almost. That's really like the for me the message I wanted to convey today is like WSL2 is here to, let's say, let us copy and run the Linux demos that we see everywhere. I'm fighting for docs since a long time now to be more Windows inclusive.
right,
I'll get there someday, but anyway. And the thing is like what I like is that in terms of development, neither like Rancher with RKE2 actually they are leading front on Kubernetes Windows, nor Docker nor Microsoft are forgetting Windows as a platform, not just to run Linux containerized on WSL2 like workloads, containerized workloads. They're still developing Windows, and people in some companies they need that. So it's still there. Don't be afraid. And like I showed, like by the way, the dual context is not supported by Docker whatsoever. So if you have some bugs, I think you have a better chance to potentially come to me or to Vinicius, the other, let's say, oriented Microsoft captain, working at Microsoft, even better. But the thing is, like, you can do everything you want on Windows, if I can end like that.
Yeah, that's a perfect ending. So we're both on Twitter. You can get our Twitter handles below. We both hang out in the Docker Captain's chat. So if you have Docker questions, if you have Rancher questions, if you have SUSE questions or SUSE or however I'm saying it wrong, if you have WSL questions, Nuno's out there. Find him on Twitter. I'm assuming you're on Mastodon as well now.
Yeah, on
And
Archiderm, but yeah, it's
yeah,
Unix
on
only
Hachiderm.
this time. Yeah.
Yeah, we're all hanging out on a Hachiderm server. So, and then we're in the Slack for Docker community. If you know what that is, find us there. If not, we're also in. At least I am. I'm not sure. I don't actually know if Nuno's got an account yet. But over there is the DevOps.fan Discord server. If you didn't know about that,
I'm there.
Yeah, there's 12,000 people hanging out in there. Not all at the same time, but that would be a lot of chat. But there's DevOps people there all the time hanging out. I spend more and more of my time there lately as the conversations have gotten really good lately, and it's really interesting stuff. So if you're into containers, if you're into DevOps cloud native way of doing things, come hang out with us on the Discord server. So thanks again, sir. It is great to have you as always. I'm always learning stuff. I'm always learning stuff from you, and every time you get me a couple of feet closer to changing my whole life and going back to Windows.
And I didn't even show you like the last time I did it, so you can go back to the last one. But remember, you can do GUI apps on containers running on Windows directly.
Yeah,
also. So
you
it's really like
you did show us a Linux terminal GUI in coming from WSL, but you didn't show us a GUI inside of a container, which can also be on Windows. And yeah, look up Nuno and Bret on YouTube and find our show from a year like 2021, and he was showing that off. It was pretty slick. I didn't even think you could do that, and it's a pretty neat thing if you want to run doubly isolated GUIs on your Windows environment. So we will, of course, have you on again in the future. It's always good to catch up and to learn all the latest stuff in WSL and all the Corsair hacking you do. And we will see you all next week. So for the show next week, we are having Q&A. So if you didn't know get the word, more Q&As. I'm going to have a guest host on with me, Matt Williams, who is maybe still in chat. Matt Williams from Infra. You actually saw him on the show last year. He's going to be here. I think Nuno and I got to meet him in the real world at CIVO Navigate a couple weeks ago. So that was a fun hangout with everyone there. And so we're going to be answering your questions on Docker Kubernetes learning cloud native, like what are all the best resources, where do you go to learn this stuff? And we're here to answer your questions, much like we did today. Only we're going to be doing it on everything containers, not just Windows or Linux and Windows. So thanks again, everyone. We will see you again live next week, same time here. And ciao. Thanks, Nuno. See you soon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.